Logan Crawford. In the studio with us right now is Phil Rutigliano, a certified financial planner. We also have Charles Steindel, who is an economist. We are also joined by Thomas Lavecchia from X Factor, and from Washington, D.C. is Chris Basso from Carfax. We're talking about consumer debt, and we're also talking about a number of issues facing Americans this week, including a massive callback of airbags. There you see an airbag. A woman apparently died after being impaled by a piece of metal that acted like a knife when the airbag deployed. Now, these are the devices that we have in our car that we expect to protect us, but in this case, it turned out to be a lethal weapon. Let's turn first to Chris Basso in Washington, D.C., who is joining us from Carfax. Chris, what's your take on the massive recall when it comes to airbags?
Well, this airbag recall actually underscores a larger issue happening nationwide, where millions of cars that have been recalled actually are not being fixed. The government estimates that out of all the recall campaigns, about 25 to 35% of those cars don't get fixed, to where it's now compounded and adds up to 37 million cars that are on U.S. roads that have an unfixed recall. It's a serious issue, and this airbag recall that's been happening is just one part of this larger issue that consumers and car owners need to be concerned about and take action on.
Chris, how do I know if I have one of these defective airbags in my car or not?
You want to do a couple things. First, you want to check and see if your car is part of the recall. Carfax makes it simple to do that. We include open recall, unfixed recall information in our Carfax reports. Plus, we provide a free app that monitors your car for recalls now and in the future. Okay. If you see that your car has a recall, call the manufacturer, call the dealer, excuse me, and make sure that you tell them the car has a recall and that you need to get it fixed as soon as possible.
All right, Chris Basso from Carfax will be back to you in a few moments. Let's turn now to Thomas Lavecchia. So many recalls, GM, Honda. What do you make of it as for the consumer? Are the costs of these massive recalls going to get passed along eventually?
At the end of the day, the consumer is going to suffer, whether it be a situation where their health is at risk, which could happen here if somebody doesn't bring a recall in and somebody moves, they don't get the information about the recall. And once everything gets fixed, they're going to pass the cost through to consumers at some point.
Okay, Phil Rutigliano, when we talk about millions of cars getting recalled around the United States and beyond, it's a problem. Are we basically holding these car manufacturers to a higher standard, or do you think they've gotten lax with their standards?
No, I think the standards are higher. In the United States is very strict when it comes to automotive. Here we have a defective part and the massive recall. So I think we're reacting to this. I don't think we're overreacting. It needs to be fixed. An unfortunate incident where the woman lost her life. This was a used car she had purchased and didn't know that the recall had even taken place. So I think as buyers, as consumers, caveat emptor, the buyer has to be aware, and it definitely pays to reach out to the manufacturer wherever you bought the car and say, are there any recalls on the car?
Charles Steindel, I heard you, saw you nodding your head in agreement. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I agree. I think they're handling the situation, the government and the manufacturers, as appropriately as can be done. I think, once again, it's horrible, it's terrible that the woman lost her life, and others have too, but we have to recognize that automobile fatalities are down. They've been down for a generation, are going down. It's not that dangerous to drive a car compared to many years ago. And I think people realize this, which is why it gets a lot of publicity, but people don't necessarily react that strongly to the recall. They should, but
and it always is the horror story that gets your attention. A woman who is impaled by a piece of metal. We're going to take note, but every day somebody's crashing into another car, an airbag deploys, and that person is spared serious bodily injury because of those anti-lock brakes, that airbag in the front, the side, the back.
Yes, absolutely. I just try to think of when I started driving many, many years ago, thinking about the safety of the car I drove compared to today.
It's
quite a bit
almost
different.
incomparable. Talk to me a little bit about the recall situation in America. Is it your take, too, that the cars are better? It's just that we have such a high standard here in the United States, Thomas?
They're naturally better. You have airbags, you have side profiles, forward. The safety standards are way better than they have been in the past, and then as a result, fatalities are down. So it's great that there is a high standard, and it is getting a lot of noise from the media. So that's a great thing. However, again, costs may go up as a result, and if there's further regulation, that also drives up costs. And at this point, I would be worried about maybe it affecting new car sales eventually if costs go up. But for now, it's important to fix the recall.
Okay, let's turn again to Chris Basso from Carfax, joining us from D.C. Chris, you've been listening to the conversation. We're talking about automobiles being safer. We're talking about knowing what your vehicle is all about, particularly if you're buying it secondhand.
Yeah, I totally agree with the other members. You know, cars are safer. They're built to last longer. And the manufacturers are doing a good thing. In the end, people need to realize that recalls are actually a good thing. They help to maintain the safety, performance, and the resale value of your car. The problem lies is when car owners, buyers, and sellers aren't taking action on these recalls and getting them fixed, taking the chance that nothing's going to happen with that car. And that has compounded to where we've got over 37 million cars with unfixed recalls on our road. The small amount of inconvenience it takes to get that car in to get fixed pales in comparison to what could happen if that recalled part fails.
All right, Chris, thanks for your thoughts. Let's change channels for just a second, not literally, but figuratively, of course, and talk about what happened at the White House this week. We had another fence jumper. Fortunately, we had two heroic canines who came to the rescue, one of whom was named Hurricane and was actually able to tackle the assailant, who apparently was an emotionally disturbed person. What the heck is going on, Thomas?
There needs to be even more security to the point of, even before they even jump the fence, just maybe have a perimeter or barrier, although it may restrict some of the tourism. It's getting out of hand, and they need to look at the security protocols and make sure they're tightened up and prevent this from happening again. Because at that point, the president, the leader of the free world is there. You have people jumping fences. Somebody got in as far as in the White House
to the White House, right.
And was tackled by somebody off duty.
Right.
That's just not acceptable by any shape or form.
Phil Rutigliano, is this a sign of mismanagement on the part of the White House, the fact that they're not able to keep it secure?
No, I think they've made improvements. I mean, last time, as Tom indicated, they were able to get in. This time they stopped them on the lawn. And I think they do need to bring the security perimeter out a little bit further. And maybe they need to have K-9 and security and Secret Service on the outside. I mean, there are so many crazy people in this world, unfortunately, or people that need help mentally, and you know, we have to protect our leaders in the White House.
Your thoughts, Charles?
I don't have any real thoughts of this. This is completely outside my area, but all I have to say is thank goodness it wasn't like the incident in Ottawa.
Right.
That's all I can say.
Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of frightening incidents this week taking place, including a school shooting out west. Again, a teenager apparently had an unrequited love affair with a young woman and took out vengeance with a gun. That's one of the major stories we talked about. Let's talk a little bit about finances once again and how we can improve the personal financial profile of each individual. Tom, I'm going to start with you. Step one, what should a person do in order to get their house in order?
May sound a little old school, but just don't buy things with money you don't have. If you have the money, buy it. But if you buy anticipation, it's eventually going to catch up with you, and that's what's happening here. So buy things with the money that you have, and don't buy things with the money you don't have.
Basically, avoid impulse shopping.
Any shopping, again, if you have the resources, you do it. But if you don't, stay away.
Okay. Phil, what are your thoughts? How can people get their financial house in order?
Well, I think they need to have a budget. They need to plan. We spend more time planning our vacation than we do our financial future. We need to get down to ground zero and just look forward, look ahead, and not spend more than we make. You know, we need to tighten the budget, just like the government does. We need to do that as individuals.
The government does. Really?
Should be. Should be.
Should be doing that. Charles, let me turn to you for just a second.
I can't argue with what they say. These are the experts on the individual side. But in general, just looking at the sheer math and understanding of it, saving something, saving regularly, it compounds, it adds up over time.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the bigger picture, since that is your scope. We have midterm elections coming up in a matter of weeks. The makeup of the Senate might change. Congress might get even more Republican. What's your, as you look in your prognosticator's crystal ball, what do you think is going to happen to the economy as we make significant changes, if they do indeed happen, in Washington?
Well, I don't think anything significant is going to happen on the economy out of Congress. I think, frankly, I think just gridlock and deadlock is going to continue. The only difference the Senate makes is over appointments, is whether the president can get the appointment process. Okay. There hasn't been any legislation to speak of in 2 years. There isn't going to be any legislation to speak of until.
So no matter what happens, we're going to just see continued gridlock, more or less?
More or less. At least that's everything I understand.
How does this impact the consumer?
I don't think it greatly affects the consumer. What affects the consumer is the basic growth in the economy. Now, the economy is recovering. It's recovering a little faster than it was a couple of years ago. Maybe it'll pick up some momentum. We're adding over 2 million jobs a year now, and people getting to become aware that that's happening, and income is beginning to grow again. So I think there's a little bit better. The consumer sentiment indexes, for what they're worth, are actually pretty high. We have problems. We have Ebola, which you mentioned earlier. We have obviously incidents like the White House incident, the recalls. And we have, of course, some economic weakness overseas, which are negatives. But I think the economic outlook for the next 2 years is reasonably positive. Okay. Not super, but reasonably positive.
Let's turn again to Chris Basso from Carfax in Washington, D.C. Chris, with all of the stuff that's happening in Washington, with personal debt levels in some cases rather high, how is this affecting car buying in the United States?
Car buying is actually up. The economy has improved over the last few years to where we're seeing levels of new car sales back to where they used to be 6-7 years ago. But used car sales in particular are about 40 to 45 million. So consumers are out there buying, and they're buying more now that used car prices are dropping, and they've got a little more money in their pocket. Again, one of the things to look for, though, if you're out there shopping for a used car, are these recalls. In the end, recalls are a good thing, but you need to make sure you're getting those recalls fixed, and that's where Carfax can help with our free My Carfax app. It's free to check, and in almost every case, it's free to fix those recalls. All
right, Chris Basso joining us from Washington, D.C. from Carfax. Thanks so much for your time. We have a few moments left. I'm going to get your final thoughts on consumer debt, consumer spending, and the economy in the United States. Big question. Tom Lavecchia, I will start with you.
Well, the auto sector is huge, and this is a perfect example. Car sales are through the roof, right? But if you look at the hiring in the car space, you know, Detroit specifically, and if you look at the wages offered for those particular employees, they're not congruent with the growth. It's going to the shareholders, stocks are going through the roof, but it's not hitting the consumer's pocket that actually works in that space, and there needs to be better congruency, which will in turn help the economy. So we're really seeing a little bit of recovery in terms of economy, but the average person is not seeing it.
Phil Rutigliano, what's your thoughts?
I think our economy is resilient. I think we're going to see the Feds make some changes the early part of 2015, and there's already been indication that that's going to happen. And I think we'll bounce back from where we are. The cars will get fixed. Consumer debt hopefully will get in check because we'll stop spending more than we're making, and you know, things will improve.
We've got 30 seconds. I'm going to give Charles a final word. Phil mentioned the Fed. Do we see any changes coming down the road from the Fed?
Well, as Bill Dudley, my former colleague and boss, would say, the best thing that could happen is if the Fed increases interest rates, because the Fed will only increase interest rates if the economy is growing vigorously, people are getting more money in their pocket, and they're worried about inflation rather than worried about the job market collapsing. So it would be good news if the Fed decided, gee, we have to hurry up and raise interest rates.
We don't have to offer free money anymore, essentially, at these interest
exactly.
rates. Okay, let me take this time to thank our guests here today. We have Tom Lavecchia from Phil Rutigliano, who is a certified financial planner, and we have Charles Steindel, who is an economist and part of our Ebru News think tank, and there in Washington, D.C., you just saw Chris Basso joining us from Carfax. And that is it for this edition of Fresh Outlook, Ebru's TV talk show that does what else but help you keep your outlook fresh and informed. I'm Logan Crawford. Thanks for joining us.